I want you to pull out your phone right now and open up a family photo. Or, if you do not have one handy, just close your eyes and picture your family tree in your mind. Think about all those branches stretching backward through time. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, going all the way back to when our ancestors were shivering in caves. Every single one of those branches is connected by what seems to be an unbreakable, fundamental rule of biology. One male and one female got together, mixed their genetic code, and created offspring. If that specific sequence did not happen every single time without fail, less than greater than, you would not be sitting here right now. It feels like basic math. Biology 101, less than greater than. We are programmed to believe that the sole objective of the human operating system is to reproduce and pass on our genes to the next generation. But here is where things get mathematically and evolutionarily weird. Today, we often hear people talk about same-sex attraction, or the concept of a third gender, or gender fluidity, as if it is some sort of modern social construct. You hear it called a new trend, less than, greater than, a lifestyle choice, or maybe a byproduct of 21st century culture. Some people even look less than greater than, at it through a deeply flawed Darwinian lens, and call it a glitch in our biological software. They argue that because these individuals do not always directly produce biological children, their traits run completely contrary to the primary directive of nature. But if you actually look at the cold, calculating algorithm of evolution, that mainstream narrative completely falls apart. Let us look at how natural selection actually works. Evolution is an absolutely ruthless auditor. It does not care about human feelings. It does not care about politics. And it certainly does not care about modern social debates. It only cares about efficiency and survival. If a genetic trait costs energy and does not provide a direct survival advantage to the species, it gets deleted from the genetic hard drive swiftly and without mercy. Nature simply does not keep expensive bugs in its software. If something is a flaw, it gets patched out over thousands of generations. So we are faced with the ultimate biological mystery, what scientists actually refer to as the Darwin Paradox. If the entire point of the game of life is to reproduce, why on earth has not the genetic coding for same-sex attraction and gender diversity been wiped from the human genome hundreds of thousands of years ago? How could a trait that seemingly bypasses the biological factory line of making babies survive the brutal, unforgiving gauntlet of human prehistory? And it gets even more fascinating when you realize this is not just a human phenomenon. We see the exact same biological programming in hundreds of other species across the planet. From penguins waddling in the freezing Antarctic to giraffes wandering the African savanna, this behavior is everywhere. It has survived ice ages, mass extinctions, and millions of years of brutal natural selection. Nature has protected this specific line of code fiercely, and if a piece of code survives that long across that many different species, it is not a glitch. It is not an accident. It means it is hiding a massive, species-saving advantage that we have completely misunderstood. So, put down that family photo, because the real reason your ancestors survived long enough to put you here is a lot more complicated and significantly more brilliant than a simple boy meets girl story. To really understand why this ancient code exists inside of us, we have to strip away everything about modern civilization. We need to forget about air conditioning, grocery stores, and modern medicine, and look at the raw, unforgiving mathematics of human survival. Evolution is not a moral compass. It is a blind, indifferent optimization algorithm. It constantly tests millions of genetic mutations, seeing what works and what fails. If a trait helps an organism survive long enough to pass on its genes, it stays. If a trait burns up precious energy without offering a tangible return on investment, less than, greater than, the algorithm deletes it. That is the fundamental law of nature. There is no room less than, greater than for sentimentality in the wild. Now, I want you to transport your mind back roughly 100,000 years. Imagine you are standing in the middle of an ancient human tribe. The wind is howling, the Ice Age winter is setting in, and every single day is a desperate, bloody struggle for calories. You are surrounded by apex predators that are faster, stronger, and far more deadly than you. Your only advantage is your brain and the tribe around you. In this brutal environment, the biological cost of keeping less than greater than a human being alive is astronomical. But the cost of making a new human being less than greater than. That is where the system almost breaks down entirely. Think about human babies compared to almost any other animal on Earth. When a baby horse is born, it is walking within an hour. When a baby shark is born, it immediately swims off to hunt. But when a human baby is born, it is essentially baked only halfway. Because of our massive brains and narrow hips from walking upright, human infants are born completely helpless. They require years of constant caring, feeding, and protection before they can even contribute a single calorie back to the tribe. A mother in this prehistoric world has to burn an incredible amount of extra energy just to nurse her child, all while being heavily restricted in her ability to hunt, forage, or run from danger. So, let us do the brutal math of prehistoric survival. Imagine a tribe where every single adult male and female is aggressively reproducing at maximum capacity. At first glance, this sounds like a biological success story, right? More babies means more humans, which means a stronger tribe. But in reality, it is a recipe for rapid extinction. If every adult is tied down by a crying, helpless infant, who is hunting? Who is foraging? If the tribe faces a sudden famine, a harsh winter, or an attack from a rival group, less than greater than, a tribe overloaded with dependent children and exhausted parents will simply collapse. Less than greater than. The carrying capacity of the environment cannot support a population where 100% of the adults are actively breeding. The resource drain is just too massive. This creates a terrifying bottleneck for early humans. The very act of reproducing, the one thing required to keep the species going, is also the exact thing that makes the tribe less than greater than, most vulnerable to starvation and death. The evolutionary algorithm hit a wall. To survive, the tribe desperately needed a biological buffer. They needed a dedicated, highly capable workforce. They needed adults who possessed all the intelligence, strength, and stamina of a human being, but who were not actively consuming the tribe's massive reproductive budget. They needed a group of people who could hunt, forage, build, and defend without adding another hungry, helpless mouth to feed. Nature needed a workaround, and it found one. So, how exactly does an evolutionary algorithm solve the terrifying problem of a tribe suffocating under the weight of its own reproductive cost? It engineers a brilliant biological workaround. It creates a built-in cheat code. To understand this, you have to realize that evolution does not actually care if you personally create a baby. It only cares that your specific sequence of genetic code makes it into the next generation. Think of your DNA like a massive zip file of source code. If you have a child, you are copying exactly 50% of that file into a new human. But here is the mathematical loophole. You also share about 25% of your exact genetic code with your nieces and nephews. Evolution realized something incredible. If you dedicate your life to ensuring that 3 of your starving nephews survive an Ice Age winter, you have mathematically passed less than greater than on more of your genetic code than if you had simply birthed one child of your own. Less than greater than. In evolutionary biology, this is known as kin selection, or what scientists sometimes playfully call less than greater than the gay uncle hypothesis. By producing a specific percentage of the population who are naturally drawn less than greater than to same-sex attraction, or who exist outside the traditional gender binary, nature created a highly specialized, elite workforce. These individuals were the ultimate prehistoric safety net. Imagine that ancient tribe again. A harsh winter hits, food is scarce, and predators are closing in. The breeding couples are completely exhausted. burning thousands of extra calories just to keep their infants warm and nursed. They cannot hunt effectively. They cannot scout for new territory without putting their babies in massive danger. Now, enter the tribe members who do not have biological children of their own. They do not have a screaming, helpless infant strapped to their chests. What do they have? They have surplus energy. They have surplus time. They have surplus mobility. Because they are not locked into the massive biological tax of reproduction, they can hunt the dangerous game. They can forage for miles without fatiguing. They can stand guard at the mouth of the cave all night. And most importantly, they can act as the ultimate backup parents. In a world where a simple scratch could lead to a lethal infection, prehistoric parents died all the time. Orphaned children were a constant, terrifying reality. Without parents, an infant in the Paleolithic era was a guaranteed casualty. But tribes that possessed gender-diverse, non-reproducing members had a secret weapon. These individuals stepped in. They adopted the orphans. They shared their surplus calories. They passed down vital knowledge, taught the young how to craft tools, and fiercely protected the next generation. They became the shock absorbers of ancient human society. A tribe composed strictly of breeders would shatter the moment a famine hit. Their resources stretched far too thin. But a tribe that contained a healthy percentage of the third gender had flexibility. They had a dynamic, fluid workforce that could adapt to anything. These individuals were not a biological dead end. They were the absolute opposite. They were the biological glue that held our fragile ancestors together. The genetic code for same-sex attraction and gender diversity survived for hundreds of thousands of years for one simple, undeniable reason. Tribes that had them survived, and tribes that did not went extinct. It was one of the most successful survival strategies in human history, operating flawlessly for millennia. That is, until human beings completely hacked their own algorithm. Let us fast forward to about 10,000 years ago. We are leaving the Ice Age and entering the era that changed everything, the agricultural revolution. You have probably been taught that the invention of farming was the greatest triumph in human history. It gave us stable food, cities, written language, and modern civilization. But from a purely biological standpoint, farming was a catastrophic system update. We traded a diverse, nutrient-rich diet for a monotonous pile of grain, ruining our teeth. We shattered our spines with repetitive manual labor in the fields. We introduced devastating infectious diseases by packing ourselves into dense, filthy settlements next to domesticated animals. But farming did something else too. It completely reprogrammed the human concept of gender. To understand this massive societal hack, we need to look at how prehistoric humans viewed property. Before farming, nobody owned the earth. You could not fence off a forest or claim a herd of wild mammoth as your private bank account. Everything was fluid and communal. The tribe shared the food, they shared the labor, and they shared the burden of child rearing. Because there was no private wealth, there was absolutely no obsession with direct bloodline inheritance. In fact, many ancient and indigenous cultures across the world deeply revered their gender-diverse members. Just look at the two-spirit individuals in Native American tribes, or the Mahu in traditional Hawaiian culture. They were often elevated to the status of shamans, healers, and spiritual leaders, specifically because they bridged the gap between the strict male and female experiences. They were seen as doubly blessed, possessing a dual perspective. They were a crucial, sacred part of the human operating system. But then, someone planted a wheat seed, and suddenly, human beings stopped moving. They built walls. They put up fences. They claimed plots of dirt. For the very first time in human history, we invented private property. Land became wealth, and food became currency. And once you have accumulated wealth, you run into a massive, unprecedented problem. When you die, who gets your farm? You certainly do not want it going to a random tribe member you just met. You want it going to your specific, direct bloodline heir. You need absolute certainty about who your children are. This changes the societal algorithm entirely. The cultural software had to be aggressively rewritten to protect private property. Suddenly, the only thing that mattered to the newly forming states and empires was producing legitimate, recognized heirs. To inherit the family farm and produce more taxable grain. Society violently locked itself into a strict, rigid binary, male and female. The vast, flexible, non-reproducing workforce that had kept our ancestors alive during the brutal ice ages was suddenly viewed as an economic liability. If you were not producing legitimate heirs to work the fields and inherit the dirt, you were a threat to the new agricultural business model. This is where the great historical rebranding happens. An essential biological survival advantage, a trait that had literally saved early human communities from extinction for hundreds of thousands of years, was systematically outlawed. Over the next few millennia, as small farming villages grew into massive global empires, this economic preference was codified into strict laws and dogmas. The third gender and same-sex attraction were actively rebranded from a vital biological feature into a moral failing, a glitch, an economic sin. We successfully erased our own ancient biological history just to protect a plot of wheat. The strict gender binary you were taught to view as an absolute biological truth is actually quite modern. It is not the default setting of human nature. It is simply the default setting of agriculture. Let us bring this all the way back to where we started. I want you to close your eyes and picture that family tree one more time. When you look at those branches stretching deep into the brutal, freezing, unforgiving history of human survival, you are no longer just looking at a simple binary factory line of reproduction. You are looking at a highly sophisticated, beautifully engineered survival mechanism. For every single direct ancestor of yours who managed to pass on their genetic code, there was a massive, complex network of individuals around them who made that survival biologically possible. Your ancestors from 100,000 years ago did not survive the ice ages solely because they were good at breeding. In fact, if that was all they did, the resource drain would have wiped them out. They survived because they were part of a tribe that utilized the ultimate evolutionary cheat code. They had a diverse, flexible workforce that could absorb the shock of famine, protect the vulnerable, and ensure that the shared genetic code of the entire family line lived on. The individuals we now categorize as the third gender, or those who experience same-sex attraction, were never an evolutionary mistake. They were the biological glue that kept early human communities from shattering under the crushing pressure of the natural world. They were the vital members who had the surplus energy to hunt when the biological parents were utterly exhausted. They were the ones who took in the Paleolithic orphans when a sudden disaster or predator strike left children defenseless. They acted as the guardians, the deep foragers, the shamans, less than greater than, and the ultimate safety net of prehistoric humanity. The fact that this specific genetic programming, less than greater than, has survived for millions of years across hundreds of different animal species through mass extinctions and catastrophic climate shifts is the absolute proof of its immense value. Remember, nature is the most ruthless auditor in the universe. It does not keep a piece of code in the master file for 1,000,000 years unless it is absolutely critical to the survival of the operating system. So the next time you hear someone argue that gender fluidity or the concept of a third gender or same-sex attraction is just some modern lifestyle choice, a 21st century social trend, or a political invention, less than, greater than, you can just smile at how spectacularly wrong they are. And the next time someone tries to use a highly flawed, outdated understanding of Darwinian evolution to claim that these individuals are less than, greater than, a biological dead end, or a glitch in human nature, you now know the actual science. Less than, greater than. They have fundamentally misunderstood the mathematics of human survival. The rigid, uncompromising gender binary that we have been aggressively sold for the last 10,000 years is the actual artificial construct here. It is a social algorithm that was hastily written by early agricultural empires to protect private property, ensure legitimate inheritance, and maximize the labor force on the farm. It is an economic policy, masquerading as biological law. But human biology is far older, far wiser, and infinitely more complex than a fenced-off plot of wheat. Diversity is not a glitch in our DNA. It is a deeply embedded, highly deliberate biological survival strategy. It was programmed into our species by the brilliant, uncompromising forces of natural selection to ensure we did not starve to death in the cold. It is a major reason our species actually made it out of the caves and lived long enough to build the modern world. It was never a bug in the human operating system. It has always been, from the very dawn of humanity, one of our greatest features.